Hey, so in today's video, I wanted to talk about shame. So shame is a really important topic. It's something that everyone deals with because, like I said in my past few videos about childhood trauma, shame is something that everyone accumulates in their childhood, and it's something that everyone deals with in their life to some degree, whether they realize it or not. And shame has such a huge influence on your life and affects you in so many different ways, so it's really important for me to talk about this and to make a video going in depth on it. So shame is the feeling that you or something about you is bad or wrong. It's specifically about being bad, whereas guilt is about doing something bad or wrong. So shame exists for the sake of socialization. So in a society that's not fully developed yet, society has different preferences for what's seen as good and bad and right and wrong. And so shame is used during the socialization period of childhood, generally between the ages of 3 and 5, to sort of teach a child what's good and bad and to sort of mold them to fit into society and to follow society's values. The process of socialization involving shame is about emphasizing the qualities that are seen as good and valuable and suppressing and rejecting and getting rid of any qualities that are seen as bad or wrong, and that's what shame is for. This mechanism of shame is really important for survival because humans are really socially dependent creatures, and so if someone was to go against societal values in some way, they would be isolated and excluded from society. And in this day and age, that's not really a problem, but a long time ago when humans were more primal and more survival based and we lived in tribes and things like that, having this mechanism of shame was essential, because if you didn't have that and you were some way that got you excluded from society and you were alone and isolated, your chances of survival would be way lower and greatly hindered because humans are so socially dependent. So when a child gets shamed for something, they adopt the value to not be that way in order to avoid being shamed again. Shame acts as sort of a self-correction mechanism to keep you from doing things that were seen as bad or wrong in the past, in the future. And in this way, you avoid being shamed again. It's a lot less painful to police and correct yourself than to have it from other people. Shame makes you adopt values and expectations of yourself to be one way and not another way. And if ever you fall below those values and expectations, that's when you start to feel shame. So these values and expectations can be sort of, they can be character traits, they can be needs, they can be emotions, really anything about you. It's one thing to feel shame around something like a character trait, like something that you are sometimes, just like a certain way that you act. But when you feel shame towards something that you are, something at the core of your being, like an emotion, something about yourself that you can't change, you'll always feel shame in some way and you'll always be against yourself. And this depth and level of shame is like the hardest to deal with and the most damaging level of shame. So shame is the primary mechanism of fragmentation within the psyche, and so it's what separates you from yourself and breaks you into pieces and makes you lose touch with who you really are. When a part of you gets shamed, it breaks your wholeness, and that part gets suppressed and put into the shadow, and then you adopt sort of a false self, which is sort of like the value or ideal to be a certain way and not another way. And in that sense, you get sort of molded into a false sense of self to fit into survival and to follow society's values. So shame only really comes up in childhood because that's where the process of socialization happens, where you learn what's right and wrong. The only way you can feel shame as an adult is if you're carrying it over from childhood through trauma, through the shame like being stuck within you. If you've healed and integrated all of your shame as an adult, you'll never feel shame again. Shame happens in childhood whenever a child is told or treated like they're bad or wrong in some way. I think a lot of times parents will end up shaming their child when they don't really mean it, in the sense that the child could do something wrong, but they tell the child off telling them like bad girl or bad boy or something like that, when really what they're referring to is the action or the thing that the child did, not them themselves. But the child has no way of understanding that, and so the child internalizes that and feels shame, and then they'll live with that shame for the rest of their life. Also, you can get shame as a child not just directly through your parent shaming you, but also just from being mistreated or not given the love that you need, not having your emotions validated and respected. There's lots of different ways to be shamed as a child. So the way shame sort of gets stuck within you as a child is, it's really just what trauma is. So when a child gets shamed and they feel shame within them, they can't process those emotions on their own. And so those emotions sort of get stuck within them and they get repressed. And then those emotions never get released, and so they live with them for the rest of their lives, or until one day they heal and release them. So when we talk about healing shame, what we're really referring to is healing trauma, if you want to heal shame at the deepest level. So pretty much everyone gets shamed in their childhood and carries that shame into their adulthood. It's just that some people get it a lot worse than others, and it's a lot more damaging to them than others. So the way that shame is as an emotional state is that, like I said before, because shame is about values and expectations and expecting yourself to be one way but not another way, when shame comes up around something, you'll feel it sort of stopping you from doing something and making you hesitant towards doing something, like acting a certain way or displaying a certain quality or whatever. And so if you still try and do that thing, your shame will just wash over you and freeze you and stop you in your tracks from doing that. Its purpose is to prevent you from doing something that will get you shamed or disapproved of from others. Shame is an especially difficult and uncomfortable emotional state because it's about you, yourself, like for who you are, being bad or wrong. And that's like one of the most difficult and uncomfortable things for a person to handle. It's like the thing that you want the least, and so being with the feeling of shame is really difficult. As hard as shame is to deal with, I think it's important to remember that shame is there for a good reason, and it's on your side and there to help you. Like what I said before about how shame influences survival and helps you from being excluded from the group, you can see that shame is there for your benefit, even if it's extremely difficult to deal with. And so because of that, it's important to not start to hate it or just want to get rid of it or anything like that and continually push it away or whatever, because doing that will only make it worse. Your shame needs understanding and empathy, and that's what will make it much easier to deal with. So shame is something that I've dealt with a lot. It's sort of like the primary wound that I have is just really deep layers of shame, and I've seen how damaging and difficult it's been for me to deal with that in my life. And so I wanted to talk about the ways in which shame affects you in your life. So pretty much everything I'm about to list off here is stuff that I've felt and I've dealt with very much myself. So first of all, shame makes you lose touch with who you really are, because it's about molding you into a false sense of self to fit into society. And so because of that, you lose touch with your authentic self, and that creates a sort of void and emptiness within you. You've probably heard of people talking about feeling empty. This is because of shame, because it suppresses your authentic self. The lingering pain of feeling shame deep down and being separated from your true self, and also just being stuck in a state of trauma, that's like the root cause of addiction. People get into addiction because they lack the comfort and the love and the pleasure of just being their authentic selves, and because they're always stuck in a state of pain, they need an escape and some sort of constant sort of pleasure to stimulate them. And this is all unconscious, like they don't realize this is why they get addicted, but this is the root cause of addiction. I know that for myself, I've always been really susceptible to addiction, and I mean, not like hard drugs or something, but in terms of like video games or TV or like your phone or like small things like that, I've always been very susceptible to getting addicted to things. And being obsessed with them and not leaving them alone, and I know that that comes from shame. People who have a lot of shame are often really defensive. They're afraid of being hurt and having their shame sort of brought up or recognized, and so they always have their guard up and they're always really defensive against things. They're also often very selfish and only really concerned with their own needs, which is understandable if you realize that people who are deeply shamed are so hurt and so separated from themselves that of course they need to be very concerned with their own needs and their own self, and so it's understandable that they would be very selfish. Shame comes with a deep sense of loneliness, not your typical sense of loneliness where you're just physically distanced from people and you don't feel like you're social enough, but just because you've been separated from your authentic self, that completely cuts off your ability to connect with people on a deep level, and your authentic self is suppressed and deep in your shadow, and so that part of you never gets to come out and connect with people, and so you might not realize it, but deep down you feel a deep sense of loneliness, of just being isolated and alone and not being able to connect with people. Shame is the root cause of self-worth issues and also self-esteem issues. Self-worth is all about the question of if you're worthy or not of love or being treated equally and things like that. And so when you hold a lot of shame, you naturally have low self-worth because that's what shame really is. And so if you have low self-worth, it's ultimately because you're carrying shame over from childhood. When a person gets shamed and separated from themselves and fragmented in that way, when their wholeness breaks and they lose their true self, deep down that develops the desire to get back with your authentic self and to be whole again and to be who you are. And this isn't something that people are really conscious of. It's just something that exists deep within them, is that they're constantly concerned with getting back with their true selves, and this is all that they really care about, and this is sort of what drives everything that they do in their lives. The problem is that people don't know how to get it, and so they try to, like, anytime they pursue something, it's really just for the feeling of love and satisfaction that they get from that, and that's sort of an attempt at receiving wholeness and having the satisfaction of being complete and being back with themselves again. And so people will chase this sort of wholeness and completion from like chasing money, chasing fame, relationships, approval from others, all these different things. They chase them because they think that they're going to make them complete and they're going to give them the thing that they don't currently have. But this sort of wholeness and completion can't be achieved through getting anything external. It can only be gotten through internal work. And so when people don't realize that, they spend their whole lives chasing this external stuff to try and get the satisfaction they want, but they never end up getting it. And so people who deal with a lot of shame go on this constant chase of trying to reach completion, and it's just all the time they're just chasing something, and they do it for their whole lives, and they're never able to reach a state of peace and completion and wholeness. And so that's why it's so important to realize that this is what you're doing, and also to realize that you can only get this thing that you want through doing inner work and not from any external thing. So you can see from those examples that shame has a huge impact on you and your life, and you can see how damaging it is to a person. And those are just a few of like the main examples. I plan on going more in depth on those, and probably I'll make individual videos for each of those things. And there's also other areas in which shame affects your life, and so I'll definitely be making more videos talking about those. But that just shows you how big of an impact shame has on your life and how important it is to address it and to heal it. So in terms of healing shame, so the reason that you hold on to shame as an adult is because you've accumulated it from your childhood. And like I said before, the way that happens is through trauma. And so when a child gets shamed and they feel that shame, they can't deal with that emotion themselves, and so they internalize it and suppress it, and that feeling of shame lives inside them, and they get stuck in that feeling of shame, and it lives within them for the rest of their lives if they don't do anything about it. And so the root solution to healing shame is just healing trauma, because that's what it is and that's how it gets accumulated. These emotions need you to go back to them and to feel through them and to release them, and that's how you ultimately heal from shame. If you want to learn more about trauma and how that works, I have lots of other videos on it. You can check those out. I think because shame is a lot to do with having values and expectations of how you should be, and it's based on sort of believing that you're not good enough or that you're not worthy or whatever. People only really work with shame on that level, in the sense of values or beliefs, and people will try to resolve shame through trying to correct their beliefs and trying to convince themselves that they are worthy of love, or to address their values and to show that what they think is bad really isn't bad, and things like that. And I think doing this sort of work can make shame easier to deal with and easier to handle, and it reduces the power it has over you. But ultimately, this won't heal your shame at the root, because all these values and beliefs come from the emotion that's stuck within you. So if you address the emotion beneath all of that, all of those values and beliefs will naturally go away on their own. And if you only address the values and beliefs on the surface, the emotion underneath those will still be there. And so you can't heal completely just by trying to change your beliefs or whatever. If you wanted to do like the deepest level of healing possible, I would avoid all of that stuff and just go straight towards addressing the emotional wound and processing that trauma that's stuck within you. And that is how you heal shame completely. I know that this depth of healing is harder and more complicated, and because of that, some people might only want to do like the lighter forms of healing, of just being able to deal with their shame better through changing their beliefs or addressing their values or whatever, and like reducing the power that shame has over them through that. And so if that's like what you're interested in, then there's lots of other sources on YouTube and books and stuff like that. You can just find those. But because I want to focus on addressing like the root solution and providing the deepest level of healing possible, the only thing I'm going to be covering on this channel is that sort of root solution level of healing trauma to help you heal shame completely. So when you address the trauma and you address the shame that is stuck within you, ultimately the only thing that shame needs is love and understanding, because shame is like really the opposite of that. It's feeling like you're bad or wrong in some way. And so when you are able to access your shame at the core and you just shower it in love and understanding, that is how it dissipates and heals, and that's ultimately what you need. For me, like the reason that I know so much about trauma and how important it is, and I know I've learned so much about healing trauma and things like that, is because my shame has been so deep and it's been so hard to deal with, that these lighter sort of solutions, like just addressing your values and trying to change your beliefs, I've tried those, but none of them really did anything for me because my shame is so deep. And because of that, I've put a lot more attention into trying to find the root cause of shame, and I've found it, which is trauma. And now I've spent a lot of time learning about trauma and how that works. And so because of that, I'm really excited to be able to provide these sort of root solutions to healing shame so that people can heal completely. And what I found is that initially I thought that I only needed this deeper level of healing just because my conditions were more severe. But what I realized is that really this deep level of healing is something that everyone needs. It's only that the lighter solutions tend to work better for people with less severe symptoms. But really, to heal completely, in any case, you need this deep level of healing. And so, like I said, I'm excited to be able to provide this stuff and to provide a lot of information on how this works and how to do this healing, because there's so little information about it out there and on YouTube and stuff, because I've done a lot of research trying to figure it out and trying to learn from other people, but there's barely any information out there on it. So I've had to learn a lot of it on my own, and so I'm excited to be able to teach that stuff and provide that stuff. So the last thing, I just wanted to share this book with you. It's called Healing the Shame That Binds You by John Bradshaw. This is a really good book. It goes really deep into shame and how it works, and gives a lot of examples on it and sort of case studies on people's lives and them like dealing with shame and everything. If you really want to understand more about shame and how it works, I definitely recommend checking this book out. It was really helpful to me and gave a lot of really good information. So yeah, that's everything for today. Hopefully this video was helpful to you and you learned some stuff about shame, and now you can see how important it is to address and to work through. So please leave a like on this video if you liked it. It helps the channel grow and I'd appreciate it. Leave a comment if you have any questions or if there's anything you want to say, and be sure to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this in the future, and I'll see you in my next video.